I thought I would start by saying hello to the people who are online. And so hello out there, all you people that are online. Thank you very much for joining us. I understand there's quite a few of you, so if you could raise your hand, the online people, raise your hand so I can see. God, there's hundreds of you, maybe over 1,000, literally. How many countries do we have out there? Yeah, raise your hands again. 20, 25 maybe. I think it's over 25 countries. We have over 1,000 people in 25 countries. We're really glad you're here with us. And how many planets are we on out there? Anybody outside the Milky Way galaxy? Oh, just planet Earth? Oh, fair enough. Then we'll stay focused on trying to save the day on planet Earth, you know. Welcome, everybody. So, as some of you out there, because I recognize some of you online, and of course, several of you here in the room know that I lived on the Colorado Plateau off and on for about 10 years, from 73 to 83, when I was 23 to 33 years old. And I was secretary and chauffeur, essentially, to the Hopi elders. So it was a rather rare opportunity to get to know your neck of the woods, so to speak. And while I was there, I learned, of course, many things, because the Hopi have been in that particular area for over 7,000 years, as the archaeologists can easily document, right? And agriculture didn't start till about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago in 3 different parts of the planet, really, right? And so they know something about deep long-term sustainability and how to live successfully in a rather dry climate as farmers. So lessons to be learned. And they, like several other Indian tribes, think of our life cycle in sort of 4 stages. There's youth, there's warrior stage, there's community leader, and there's the elder stage, right? And wintertime is storytelling. You know, you're not out planting your beans and corn and squash. You're inside trying to keep warm. And so all the different groups would get together and tell stories. And I want to very quickly just tell you one story from 500 years ago. And they have the oral tradition continuously to know when the Spanish conquistadors were coming up through Mexico and up across the desert above Flagstaff in the Painted Desert, the Hopis went out to meet with them. They wanted to see, you know, what these people were all about, right? And they've told me the story, and I really don't have time today to tell you the story in any detail, but I can just summarize to say they came away from that meeting thinking, we might be in for a dark period in time. They seem to have lost sight of the great cycles of nature. Their ways, their technologies, so to speak, are not in sync with the cycles of nature. And this was embodied in a petroglyph that's referred to as Prophecy Rock, which is about kind of almost the size of this larger white area behind me. And on it, it tells a story that, again, I can't tell you too much about in tonight's short time, but it shows 3 world wars and 2 paths. One that goes off into chaotic lightning strikes and one that goes off into healthy corn plants. But the 3rd World War is drawn differently than the first 2. And there's a window of opportunity, they would say, to create a marriage between the circle and the cross. The circle representing the great cycles of nature, and the cross, the ability to divide and rearrange, in a sense, technology. So there's a window of opportunity for the age of appropriate technology and to create this marriage of the circle and the cross, in which case we go off into healthy corn plants for a very long period of time, right? So they were in a dark period of time, and there was coal and uranium mining going on down there in the desert when I was there, and draining of the aquifers and threats to the land and life. And at one point I said to the elders, you know, what can I do to help? And they sort of said, well, you know, you're secretary and chauffeur. They didn't quite say it in these words, but they said, your spelling's not so good and your driving could improve. Maybe you should go back into your own culture and try to get your culture's foot off our throat. So it was at that point in time, they said, we don't really need your help. We need you to get your foot off our throat. You know, we've been doing fine for 7,000 years down here, longer, they say. And that's when I went back to start the Rainforest Action Network, where I could sort of take on some of these targets that were putting the foot on the throat of the planet and the indigenous peoples and all of us, right? So in 1985, I started the Rainforest Action Network. In the very beginning, we built a grassroots fighting force of 120 different RAGs, Rainforest Action Groups. So there was the Duke University RAG. The second one in the world was the Boulder RAG, right? And we had 120 of these Rainforest Action Groups that would organize locally and nationally and globally in this coordinated kind of way. And we had a simple strategy, which is stop the bad and start the good. Both things need to happen, kind of a quid pro quo. But another part of our simple thinking was pick a target and attack. And we picked targets where there were local ways for people to engage locally, because not everybody wants to work nationally or internationally. We picked targets at a national level and at a global level, right? And we took on some of the biggest companies at the time. We took on Burger King around Rainforest beef, and after 18 months got them to cancel a $35 million contract with Costa Rica and stop using Rainforest beef. We took on Home Depot, which was the largest retailer of wood on planet Earth at the time, and probably still is, right? They were selling mahogany doors and all kinds of old-growth wood products. And we could launch through our grassroots fighting force. We had on one particular day in Canada and the United States about 107 demonstrations at Home Depot stores across the continent. And you could imagine, you know, the store managers all calling Atlanta, Georgia to Central Command saying, what the hell is going on? I've got hippies hanging off my you know, the wall or in the front door hanging banners, and I've got people dressed up like toucans and monkeys out there handing out flyers telling people to not shop at Home Depot, go down the street to Lowe's. That really pissed them off, right? We had life-size papier-mâché cows out there, you know, sort of eating the rainforest and defecating styrofoam Whopper burgers. We used that mostly at Burger King, but we used it all over the place because the press went wild with it, you know, parlor tricks. But we also took on Mitsubishi. That's where I really got to know Ms. Hunter Lovins. You know, we got into a real pissing match over the Mitsubishi boycott. But there's a lesson that I learned around civil disobedience. You know, with Martin Luther King Jr., the goal of civil disobedience was not to defeat your enemy. It was a tool of last resort, but still to get people to walk forward together, right? And so I not only became good friends with Hunter out of that, she was brought on by Mitsubishi to be the shuttle diplomat between those pissy-ass warrior activists from Rainforest Action Network and the executives of Mitsubishi. And she was shuttling back and forth trying to build bridges. So we took on Citibank, which was funding illegal logging. It was the largest private bank in the world at the time. We took on the World Bank and got them to stop all the building of all hydroelectric dams in the Amazon and other tropical rainforests. We brought in at annual meetings of the World Bank indigenous peoples to let them talk for themselves about the tragedy of these situations. And our mission statement was to protect the rainforest and support the rights of indigenous peoples. So from our birth, we tried not to be just focused on environmental things, but to be a merging of human rights and ecological concerns all hand in hand. We took on the World Trade Organization in the Battle of Seattle. And all of these campaigns and a lot of victories, we helped to build a movement, the Save the Rainforest movement. And that helped feed into another global movement, which was the anti-globalization movement. But the anti-globalization movement was not aspirational in a positive sense, right? And we don't even hear so much about it right now. What we really need at this point in time is that holistic sort of inclusive economy movement, right? Call it the regenerative economy or the donut economy, or we call it the true cost economy. We largely mean the same thing. It's inclusive and it cares about nature's needs as well, right? So out of all of those kind of campaigns, there's lots of advice and people we can bring to bear to work with this burgeoning new effort. And some of the advice that I just wanted to throw on the table quickly is to say that what we did is we tried to seek advice from a really diverse set of those community leaders and elders from different cultures from the get-go when we formed the Rainforest Action Network. We also tried, at one point, part of that advice was said, there's two things you need to care about. So what do you mean? They said, well, most everybody's passionate about something. That's what you care about, right? So you care about the things you're already passionate about. But if something's behind the rock and it might kill you, it behooves you to care about that too. So the two things is care about what you do care about, but care about what you also need to care about. So for some people, their particular passion is protecting animals and fighting for endangered species, and they don't care so much about the lack of inclusiveness in their culture. They need to speak about that also. Vice versa, there are people who are focused on those kinds of equity issues that aren't speaking about nature's needs and their broader family of the web of life. We all need to be speaking to each other's concerns in that integrated message. So another point is about picking bold, achievable targets that people can interact with at a local level or a national or global level. This new facility, this new organization that we're setting up here, its mandate is largely around global coordination. We'll see how it all plays out. But in terms of network of networks, one aspect of that, in terms of Stuart that I was talking to, is looking at the different sort of next economy movements in different continents and coordinating between that. So not everybody can focus on that level. And a lot of what has to be done to transform things is that local level. Another point is setting a high bar and inviting people to that table. What we did with the Rainforest Action Network is we figured out a high common denominator, because many of us have experienced coalition building where you end up getting the lowest common denominator that everybody will vote yes against. That sucks. That's not the bold, achievable way to create a great ecological and societal U-turn to a more socially just society, right? We've got to set a high common denominator with this effort, invite people to that party. And it's going to rule out some people, but c'est la vie. Maybe they'll get the message, eventually. Another point is around, as you win these bigger and bigger victories, movements may emerge, but they don't always. And Michael's going to speak to that aspect of it, because there are certain things that you can pay attention to in the midst of campaigning to build bigger and bigger victories and get people excited and get a sense of traction and motion. And just the last couple of little things here is to say that you've got to celebrate those victories, small and large. And that is really what makes the heart big and wild, as we heard earlier today from one of the other speakers. And we tried to do that at Rainforest Action Network. We said, look, work hard and party hard. We organized fundraisers and celebrations and had a good time. But we were deadly deliberate about what we were doing, because this is, in fact, a life and death situation. And every time we would get arrested and thrown into the police car in handcuffs and taken off to jail, we would explain to the officers there, men and women, and say that, look, we understand you got other things to do, and you may think that this, we're distracting you from important work. But the soft underbelly of the corporations is not deep in the Amazon or the Congo or Southeast Asia. It's in the big cities of Tokyo and Paris and New York and San Francisco and others. And we people here have to help, make that message heard. And so this is a deadly serious thing, because it's literally life and death, not just the endangered species and the jaguars and howler monkeys being driven into extinction, but indigenous peoples and indigenous language and cultural genocide all happening. And they really appreciated that. They understood, and they respected us. And more than once, I can tell you that I've been thrown in jail, and after a few hours, somebody will come over, open it up, and say, get out of here. And they just turned us loose, And that's because they were not the enemy, We did, pick a target and an attack. But again, it was not ultimately, even in case of the Mitsubishi campaign, as Hunter can tell you at the reception tonight, it wasn't to defeat the enemy, it was to get them to walk forward. And what Mitsubishi ended up doing with all their pulp and paper mills across the world, which are many, they are now FSC certified, Forest Stewardship Council certified. Is that the great ecological U-turn? No. But was it, a campaign of consequence for that point in time? Yes, absolutely, it was. Last little thing I'll say here, next to the last little thing I'll say here, is that we created a press kit early on, and it was very ecumenical. We were starting the Rainforest Action Network. We had our own organization. But the press kit highlighted the really good work of probably 40 other organizations in the U.S. and elsewhere. And we, at Rainforest Action Network, we didn't necessarily have the real expertise on the World Bank or on indigenous issues in South America, but we knew who did, and we put them in there. And so that ecumenical approach meant that everybody embraced this larger effort. And so it wasn't about the Rainforest Action Network, it was about the Save the Rainforest movement and support the rights of indigenous peoples. So that's something that I think this new organization could do that I'd be happy to work with you all on a press kit that helps build, that is movement building. And one could set up quarterly webinars to keep each other informed. In fact, even here in Colorado, there could be a separate set of quarterly webinars around the local organizing or trying to institute some of the kinds of things that Michael Schumann was telling us all about. And I will end, since we have not left the old paradigm of the free trade economic ideology. And those people, by the way, think free trade is free from ecological limits, but it is absolutely not. And that analysis came from Vandana Shiva. She said, you know, they throw around free trade, it's their positive language, but it is not free from ecological limits. And our regenerative economy will honor and respect those ecological limits. But we haven't left it, so I'm going to end with an advertisement. Because that's what the old paradigm does. It advertises and sells to your soul. But hopefully it's one that you'll appreciate, which is to say that Tuesday, May 30th, right here in Boulder, Colorado, there's going to be a Rainforest Action Network fundraiser, and the esteemed Paul Hawken is going to be there. And there are flyers out on a table, and our esteemed local organizer, can you stand up? So at the reception, you know, if you want to know more about that, so we have lessons from old school organizing, and we don't want to throw those away, but it's not the entirety of this story. The world has changed since 1985 when we started the Rainforest Action Network, and there are new techniques, and that's what we're going to hear about now from Michael, and I'm very excited to be here to hear about that.
So as we think about movement building for this room and the last 2 days that we've been here, I think an important place to start for this conversation is that the foundation of movement building hasn't changed. We're still talking about a group of people bound together by shared values, animated by a shared sense of purpose, working toward a specific goal. And my experience is mostly in politics and presidential campaigns. Take off my jacket because it's making a problem with the microphone.
Yeah, that was me bumping it.
Okay, I'll take off your jacket anyway. Is that, you know, modern political campaigns haven't changed dramatically in their structure since 1896. William McKinley's campaign manager was a guy named Mark Hanna. And the basic principles of organizing people, communicating and persuading voters and turning people out are those sort of same core sort of fundamentals of electoral campaigns are the same. The tactics have changed dramatically. And so when we think about the sort of core understanding of organizing and how that translates into sort of a modern environment, it's important to remember that the foundation is the same. And the place we started this morning with Rob and the rest of the panel around communications and narrative, and a story is at the heart of a movement, right? Being able to articulate with clarity and power the values that you're animated by and the mission that you're trying to achieve is the foundation of binding people together around that shared sense of purpose. When we look at the Obama campaigns, there's a lot of mythology around what we did. And it, let's just say it wasn't magic, right? And there isn't a magic technology, social media tool to scaling traditional organizing. What digital tools and what the internet and what technology and data allow us to do is allow us to do the same kind of person-to-person community organizing and relationship building at a much larger scale and do it much faster than we could do it before we had tools like the internet and social media, and the pace of communications has dramatically increased. When we think about that crazy slide that Rob showed this morning, the Lumascape, with all of the sort of paid media landscape. The reason why we feel so lost and have such a difficult time breaking through and getting a narrative and a story across is because the map that we have in our heads about how the world is organized, how we communicate, how we consume information, how we market, we still have this traditional channel-based, silo-based idea of paid media, earned media, and owned media. And the reality that we sort of stumbled into, frankly, and sort of discovered as part of sort of embracing social media, as part of how we were going to reach people and how we were going to activate people, is that the innovations of the last several decades in each of those silos has broken them down such that we are much better off thinking of that entire crazy Lumascape as a big graph. One big graph, one interconnected network of networks where we are a node in that graph, just like the people that we're trying to engage. We are not the center of the universe. Our organization is not the center of the world. Our campaign is not the most important thing going, whether we like it or not. We are very comfortable with this sort of self-centered idea of ourselves at the center of at the center of a movement, or at the center of an issue, or at the center of politics. It's just not true. There is no center to a graph, right? And if we think more humbly about our role in inspiring people toward a mission, we can be more honest about the way we communicate more effectively in all of the ways that we are connected to people. So when we think about sort of the good lessons, the interesting lessons, the non-mythical lessons from the Obama campaigns, you know, some of them are pretty simple. They're about meeting people where they are, right? They're about leveraging our innovation, particularly in 2008, when we had a huge, this sort of amazing team of sort of people brand new to politics. Sort of digital politics wasn't even a thing. We used to call it new media because we thought it was new. And Joe Rosebars was our new media director back then. He's the founder of Blue State Digital, and the one who brought me into the campaign. We built this whole team and this whole sort of culture of innovation around a simple reality, which is we couldn't win a traditional campaign, right? So many of us came into sort of thinking about marketing and communications and campaigns with old ideas, but we couldn't win a traditional primary, right? The then Senator Obama, with the funny name from Illinois that nobody'd really ever heard of, wasn't going to beat Senator Clinton, Senator Edwards, Bill Richardson. We were the long shot. Like the political reality. It's important to remember the political reality and the incredible power that political desperation gives you for innovation, right? We had to win in other ways. We had to involve new people in politics, and that meant going and finding new ways of connecting to people that hadn't been invited into the process before. And this is where we start getting into long-term movement building, which is if the mission is about a single point in time or a single battle, you will have a really hard time persisting a movement beyond whatever that moment in time is. And the people that you are inspiring to be part of what you're trying to achieve must be given a role and a responsibility in achieving the mission, right? And that responsibility is something that must be communicated and made clear early on, right? And all of the individual actions that people take as part of individual battles, individual deadlines, individual moments in time, whether that's, you know, we're going to have debate watch parties and organizing around the Iowa JJ, right? There's these big organizing moments in political campaigns as part of building institutional power, as part of building long-term relationships with people that give them an opportunity to play a role in the future that we're all trying to create. What's important is that the values, there's this progression that I'm describing. Values drives the mission, is executed via strategy, is implemented via a set of tactics. Values, mission, strategy, tactics. Especially when we talk about technology and data and social media, we want to talk about tactics, right? We want to talk about how to use Twitter, what are the best emails, like what are the new tools, like what's the shiny object syndrome, right? Like this is a really easy place to get lost in the conversation because there's lots of shiny objects. There's lots of new stuff. There's new tools all the time and new networks and new technologies. And what about cloud computing and big data and whatever the other buzzwords we want to talk about are? all of that stuff is a distraction at the beginning of trying to figure out what you're trying to achieve, right? We have to start at a high enough altitude, so we're talking about a network of networks, that we need to articulate our values at a level that is both inspiring and at a high enough altitude that all of the work that we want to do is in service of a shared set of values. So that if we have a particular focus area, a particular issue within this larger community, whether that's agriculture, whether that's finance, that that each of our successes is in service of some larger piece. Otherwise, we aren't one movement, we're a whole bunch of movements, right? And this gets to what Danya was talking about earlier about the poo-poo platter, right? About like not actually being animated by a sense of purpose, but by this, sort of hodgepodge of very specific, very prescriptive policy ideas as a set of planks in a movement. And this is where the Democratic Party in particular has gotten lost, right? We really struggle with the why. Why are we progressive, liberal, Democrat, whatever we want, however we want to name ourselves? We really struggle at that altitude in a way that the right does not, right? There is and it's a function of failing to invest in ideology and philosophy and ideas as the foundation of a larger movement. And I think this is a place where, in sort of the sort of evolution of the Obama campaigns and administration, we didn't invest sufficiently in the long-term party building and infrastructure that was going to provide foundation for the sort of what was going to come next. And I think we see in the 2016 campaign that weakness. And I think we see in the rebuilding that's happening now and the incredible proliferation of political engagement and organizing in the resistance broadly that is almost entirely external to the party, right? The party has been very passive in that process because of the internal reorganization and process that the party's in, that those efforts are not bound together in a coherent way. They are all extremely tactical, and a lot of them are brilliant and exciting and interesting and getting new people involved in civic life in ways that we haven't seen in a long time, animated by a sense of urgency and a demand and this constitutional threat and this sort of existential fear that people have about sort of the future of the republic. And I think one of the challenges that we have as we think about the movement toward a new model for an economy that embraces politics and government and civic life and all these other pieces is being able to connect this kind of tactical engagement to the levers of power, right? We are in a republic. Whether we want to abolish the Electoral College or whether we want to do those other things, we're still in a republic, right? And so because we don't live in a direct democracy, the risk is, as Mr. Powers was saying earlier about petitions, isn't that they aren't valuable on their own. It's that they're insufficient on their own. They are valuable as part of a set of actions that you ask people to take in a habit of civic engagement and participation in a relationship over time. They are in and of themselves, as a moment in time, insufficient to the task of creating change. If we are not careful, when we think about movement building right now, at this moment in history, this sort of fragile moment in history, that we are going to have to figure out how to translate progressive energy, progressive liberal resistance, there's all this stuff, energy and activism into power. Or we're going to end up with the loudest, most active, most aggressive, least powerful movement in the history of American politics. We are going to have to win some elections, right? We are going to have to reclaim some of these institutions, right? And that means, helping the process of revitalizing and reforming the Democratic Party, right? That means revitalizing and changing and evolving the Republican Party. Both of the two major parties in our system are incredibly weak right now, right, and incredibly fragile. And there is really, really good work going on in the DNC of trying to reimagine what the party can be. And I am still really optimistic about what's possible. At the same time, I'm not sure we can wait, right? And if we want new kinds of leaders to step up and new voices to come out of this process, we are going to have to find ways to support new kinds of leadership external to both parties. And that's not me calling for a third party. We live in a two-party system. Third-party conversations are super complicated for lots and lots of reasons. But it does mean that one of the great things about decentralizing organizing and decentralized movement building is that we can create our own infrastructure, right? This is one of the big shifts and the big changes over time with the rise of decentralized tools, free tools, volunteer tools, distributed organizing models, is that we can create our own centers of gravity external to the traditional institutions of power. That said, that doesn't mean we can ignore the institutions. We need to rebuild trust in these institutions. Democracy is a system of faith. It is a system of faith in each other and in the powers and the institutions that we imbue to take care of us, right? It is a system of comparative advantage, right? And so if these institutions continue to get weaker, that's, Krugman had this whole column today or yesterday about the fall of the Roman Republic, right? And it was about the collapse of political norms and the inability and the danger of leaders abandoning the things that are these sort of sure foundations that are beyond personality, that make up the foundation of the system. And so we have to be ambitious and joyous and earnest and bold about the foundational elements of democracy as part of whatever movements we are building right now, right? And I know there's a focus here around regenerative economics, the ideas of new models. I run a B Corp. I'm part of this movement. But this is a part of a larger, I think, political moment relative to the future of the country and the future of the world, and being able to create a positive momentum. And this goes back to the morning session. I think it's a nice bookend to the day, right? Starting with this conversation about how to talk and how to tell stories and how to come up with a narrative as the foundation for what is it that we are willing to strive for. Because we also can't afford to play small, right? Small ball's not gonna get us where we need to go right now. Right, it's just the stakes are too high, the problems are too vast, and our leaders are failing, right? And so this means new people running for, in my world, in my sort of the work that I do every day, this means new people running for office. This means new leaders talking in new ways about things like structural problems like government ethics, government reform, systemic corruption like gerrymandering and campaign finance, as the central fundamental focus of, are we going to continue to buy into the stale left-right debate, or are we going to talk about something that is germane to people's lives? Right? And I think this was the great, and I would say great lie, but very effective lie of President Trump's campaign. Right? That there is a greater future for all of us. We can be great together again. And that's something that we have to figure out how to match in a way that is honest and truthful, like Donnie said, and progressive, and about progress for everyone, right? And that doesn't fall victim to the same small ball internal DC bullshit that we always fall into. So the last thought I want to leave people around movement building generically, and I think we should open up to questions, is that the tactics do matter, right? That like tools and technology and data and the things that I am an expert in, that I haven't been talking about, do create efficiencies. And there are good tools out there that make it easier to communicate and collaborate and build communities at scale and recruit. We had 4 million active volunteers on the Obama campaign. We couldn't have recruited that many people in a year's time. We just would have run out of hours in the day, right? And so there is potential for doing things faster and at a larger scale and inspiring larger movements more quickly than ever before. And I think that's where thinking about data, thinking about tools for publishing, thinking about how our communities are more efficient and more effective is where technology plays a role across all the functions that we need to do inside a campaign, right? Back to Mark Hanna. You raise money, you mobilize voters, and you message effectively, right? We're still doing the same things, we're just doing them with new tools at a greater scale and a greater pace because the technologies are allowing us to do new things more quickly. So don't get lost in the tactics, but you can't forget about them either. Or so I would say, don't start with tactics, but make sure you make it to tactics as you think about planning and building organizations. I think that's probably a good place to open it up. Yeah.
Thank you both. Okay, here's our plan. We're going to go about 15 minutes with questions, and then Michael has a presentation he was going to do. So we're going to go about 15 minutes with questions, and Michael's got a presentation to teach us more about how to organize digitally. So, okay? So I want to warn you, we're going to be cutting off a lot of questions.
And then we'll do more questions.
And then we can do more questions. And then we have beer. And you can do even more questions with beer. So, and remember our rules for questions. You don't have to like give the rationale, explain it. You're just gonna ask a direct question. We have faith. You are incredibly competent.
I'll hold the mic.
So, Vince.
You want to hold the mic? Okay. You made a comment about decentralized movement building, that we could do that. But I'm thinking about the Republicans who started about 10 or 12 years ago with the Koch brothers, the Murdochs, Karl Rove, and they pulled all these actors together in a very centralized kind of long-term plan, which has borne fruit. So I'm wondering how you contrast that with your idea about decentralized movement building.
I think it's a good question. I think centralization can be really powerful. I think progressives are uniquely terrible at it, and we're unlikely to succeed doing it. I think there is a, and like, sort of in the George Lakoff view of the different mindsets and neurology behind conservative thinkers and sort of liberal thinkers, we are unlikely to trust centralized solutions. We like inclusiveness. We want everybody to be included. We love the ideas of 1,000 flowers blooming. It is unlikely that we would succeed in an uber centralized Mercer Koch brothers network kind of way. It's really powerful. They've done an exceptional job. They have centralized lots of their infrastructure building external to the party, right, in a way that has been incredibly effective. They've also sort of created this network of investments in things like the Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute and these other places that has been, that shows the power of sort of trust in hierarchy. How many people in this room really trust in institutions and hierarchy? Right? Like, we're just not going to be good at that, I don't think. So I think it's a really good strategy. I'm just not sure it's one that's going to work well on the left. And so I think getting to a place, one of the things that the project that I'm working on, one of the things that we talk about a lot is with all these new communities and new projects that are popping up and these new organizing efforts, Swing Left, Indivisible, Flippable, all Sister District, all these different things, and I like them, they're all great. A lot of them are organizing the same people over and over again. So if they're gonna be 1,000 flowers blooming, we wanna be the dirt, like from a technical perspective, right? So we're trying to help create this concept of some shared foundation that makes data sharing easier, that makes connecting the people that we're engaging that are overlapping easier, so that the relationships we have with people are more holistic. They're less channel-centric, they're less narrow, there's these kinds of things. But we do have to figure out how we're gonna collaborate. And look, one of the challenges is collaboration tends to be slow, right? It's the sort of famous great African proverb, if you wanna go fast, go alone. If you wanna go far, go together. We got a long way to go, so we have to go together. And we gotta figure out how to respond both. There are immediate, right now, things we gotta deal with, right? There are immediate boycotts and standing up around healthcare votes and these things that have to get responded to right now. And there are these longer term infrastructure questions that we have to figure out how to respond to. And so we got to figure out how to do both. It's going to be harder in some ways, I think, than doing it on a centralized path. But I don't really think we have a choice, because I don't really think we can go that way. Somebody back there.
John?
Yeah, hi. First, Randy, thank you for your work. I have a question, though, for the technology whiz-bang in the group. Can you comment on Cambridge Analytics and whether that introduces something new to
Sure.
the possibility of democracy?
Sure. Cambridge Analytica is a group funded largely by the Mercer family, for folks who don't know. They're, like all presidential campaigns, there's a lot of methodology around President Trump's campaign. And clarifying the sort of the truth from the marketing for Cambridge with Cambridge Analytica is really difficult. And it's hard to see inside. So what I will say is I think what Cambridge Analytica talks about thinking more expansively about how we understand people is very smart, right? Their ability to, the President Trump's campaign's ability to optimize and test content at a scale and a pace is something that we have never seen before, right? Tens of thousands of versions of content on Facebook on a daily basis as a way of refining what they're talking about and how they're talking about it and what's resonating, what's working today. I think that's something that Cambridge Analytica was able to do really effectively. I think they're taking sort of the basic principles of A/B testing to a sort of like massively parallel extreme in a way that it was pretty effective, right? Some of the most shared, most widely seen pieces of content were one of these 10,000 versions of all the things. I think one of the challenges there is to create 10,000 versions of a message, you got to have a lot of tolerance for saying some crazy, crazy bullshit. And to a level that I think lacks integrity and is irresponsible. And so I think there is a limit to sort of the value of this sort of the breadth of this sort of testing. But I do think they did some things really well. I don't know that what they have done. I think one of the things that they seemed to understand better than most was this graph concept of how people consume information and communicate. Their balance of media spending was much more in line with how the people they needed to reach consumed information than I've ever seen. Their incredible willingness to abandon sort of the traditional TV carpet bombing model of political campaigns. And they ran TV ads. They ran good TV ads, right? But their balance of spend between digital and traditional and television was dramatically, they spent dramatically more on digital than the Democrats did in 2016, which I think was really smart. The efficiency of that spend is incredibly high. And the capacity for that content to travel through the graph is much greater. How easy is it for you to share a TV ad with somebody else? It's not that, right? Like, unless you happen to see it on YouTube, like, then now we're back to talking about social content, right? And we're talking about the capacity for content to travel in a graph. But more of their ability to empower their supporters to be their own storytellers was reflected in where they were publishing content. So I think Cambridge Analytica seems like a really good, smart, big data analytics company. Doesn't seem particularly different to me than Civis, which is a group that was created by Dan Wagner, who was our chief analytics officer in 2012, and runs an extremely sophisticated, very smart, big data modeling, statistical analysis, voter targeting company that's progressive. Right, it sort of is on our side of the aisle. So I think it was a big step forward for them, and I think it was pretty effective, but I don't know that it in and of itself represents some quantum shift. I think there's some other interesting problems, things like content farms and Twitter bots, that were uniquely problematic in this cycle, but that if we have to be very careful about fighting the last war, right? Those are tactics that were very effective in a moment in time with a particular candidate, and I think Democrats have to be very careful about looking back to Obama and going, we need to run that model. I think we need to look at the 08 and 12 campaigns as outliers, right? In terms of a historically unusually unique, that's a terrible sentence, candidate, right? Unique moment in time, a candidate we may not see again in this generation, right? Regardless of what you think about him as a president or as a leader, just as a gifted campaigner, I've never seen anybody like him. And we may not, again. And so if all of our strategies are, we can't rely on strategies that require 100% of effectiveness by us and complete failure by our opponents. That's asinine, right? That's just asking for a close loss, 2016, right? We can't model behavior and create these tolerances that are so low that things can't be unpredictable because too much of the world is too hard to control. Sorry, I went a little off on a tangent, but.
So we've got one more question we're gonna do, and then we're gonna have him do his presentation.
Okay.
Then, yes.
I had two comments that I'm curious about, a question that I'm curious about for you. One is just being in groups of women who are mobilizing, we have these arguments now about being purple versus not. Like how might we break out of the bubble of the current preacher choir that we're in, especially given the current media landscape? And how might we begin building things, not just protesting? So I'm curious about if both of you have an instinct around being builders and being more purple to break out of our bubbles.
You're saying purple from like an idea, like red, blue.
Yeah,
Okay.
because right now if we're fighting the same battle lines, we're in deep shit.
I agree. I don't disagree with that. I think we have to let go of the gradient we've been on because I think it doesn't. Most people in this country feel some level of distrust and cynicism and anxiety that they're not being represented by anyone in either party. And I think there's a huge majority of people that live in some version of that state, which means the old gradient isn't working well for anyone, except for the people who are in power. And I don't give a shit about them. They're supposed to be serving me, right? I'm not interested in, I think their grasp on power is not tenuous enough. They should be anxious every day that they are not doing a good enough job and they might lose their job, every day. And so I think to the question around echo chambers, essentially, right? Around how do you not just preach to the choir and talk to people, right? This is a challenge in this room, right? There's a lot of violent agreement in this room, right? But there's how do we start expanding the size of the room? It means going to places where you're uncomfortable. It means going and looking for ways to communicate that aren't your Facebook wall or your Medium post, and I'm guilty of this too, I do the same stuff, but is finding ways to go and talk in environments where you are very likely to not be, to be disagreed with. And this is a place when we get to the communications and the narrative piece that I think came up this morning that I think is really important, which is that being opinionated means that there are no self-evident arguments in politics. If you are saying the phrase, well, obviously, you are lost like a goat in a pharmacy. Don't ever say it, ever. It should not be part of any conversation that you have about something that is controversial, because it's not fucking obvious, right? There are whole swaths of the country that don't think what you're saying is obvious and this concept of a self-evident argument is a huge, huge problem on the left, in particular because we think we're rational, intellectual, and that's why people on the right think we're elitist and effete and assholes. And so going into these conversations ready to be challenged and being okay with being challenged and being okay with people disagreeing and being comfortable with that confrontation in a way that is kind and loving and accepting of difference and tolerant in the ways that we are very tolerant inside the family, but very intolerant outside the family. And so you gotta go find some other places to be. And that's really hard, and it's super uncomfortable. But we gotta do it. I mean, there is no answer to this question that's oh, here's the nice, comfortable way to go interact with people that disagree with me. That's not a thing. Do you, Randy?
Tough love sometimes is what you have to deliver, and sometimes you have to deliver it to yourself and just say, look, I got to suck it up and learn how to do things differently.
So with that, Michael, we're going to ask you to show your deck.
Okay, sure. So I wasn't intending to show this, but then I was talking about it yesterday, and Hunter really wanted me to just show this off a little bit. So part of, this is just a little bit of me showing what I'm working on right now. Right, and it relates to this conversation because what I was talking about the lack of infrastructure and how much we've relied on, rightly or wrongly, we've relied on political parties for a lot of the sort of institutional infrastructure of getting access to power. And I don't know if this is my deck or not. No, this isn't my deck.
This isn't your deck.
No.
Do you know where?
No, I don't.
Can you just pull it up here and we'll throw it on the machine?
It's the AMD deck. I don't know.
Did it, Arnold, did it get
No, we know where it is. We'll find it in a second. There are a set of investments around, I talked a lot about sort of ideas as the foundation, right? And that we haven't invested in philosophy and ideology effectively on the left. And that there are most of the tools that we use, yeah, this is it. Thanks, sorry. That we use, we're using a lot of the same infrastructure, basically the same infrastructure for the last decade or so, since roughly 2005. The problem is the world is like really, really fucking different than it was in 2005, and there's a whole series of investments that I think we need to make. And while the DNC is reorganizing and doing these things, we can't wait. So these are the things that I think we need to be effective as infrastructure and foundation for not just organizations like this, but also new candidates, new campaigns that feel more like the world that we live in. So if ideas are the foundation for movements, we need to invest in ideas. And we need to invest in the people creating and writing and generating new ideas and new content constantly, all the time. There are 100 Tommy Lahrens on the right, most of which people in this room have probably never heard of, right? There are not a lot of those on the left, right? What we need to go do is find 50 versions of Van Jones 10 years ago and pay them to write and think and podcast and publish and speak and talk and do all these kinds of things. And then we got to give them tools and put money behind that content. One of the things that the conservative movement has done exceptionally well is make their ideas seem more mainstream and broadly adopted than they are, right? You hear a lot in conversations like this, like everybody agree, most people agree with us. Who gives a shit? Like if people agree with you but aren't active about it and aren't acting on that knowledge, like the fact that this like moral victory that most people agree with us is just comforting crap. Right? So like we've got to get to a place where the ideas that most people believe in feel as dominant and mainstream as we believe them to be, and that requires us to spend money, right? And invest in these things in a long-term way. The second piece of this is embracing this shift in mentality from channels to graphs that I keep talking about as the mechanism for how we build movements. And there's a lot of shifts that this requires. I'm actually writing a book about this, which is that we have this sort of channel-based model in our heads about how communications works, and all of our organizations are set up in a channel, mostly in each department has a channel, right? And in a campaign, right? Like the field department has this, traditional voter contact channel, knocking on doors, making calls. The digital team has email and social. The finance team talks about raising money. The communications team or press team has earned media and press relations. The media team has TV and advertising. The problem is the world looks like this looks like what you're seeing on the right, right? All of these things are interconnected. The way that we consume information is totally different. And we're really comfortable with this as individuals. We've totally changed the way we relate to each other and the tools we use. But most of our organizations kind of look and feel the same. Like our org charts are the same, right? The departments are the same. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, right? So, and I think part of the problem of shifting, right, is that the tools that we use to do this are based on the old model. We don't have a lot of tools that are based on the new model. So if you walk into an organization and say, new org chart, the next question is, what tools are we going to use? And you're like, totally screwed, right? Because now you've got this whole new organizational model, whole new way of thinking, more collaborative, less redundancy, more sort of interconnectedness, people at the center, holistic views of the people you're engaging. Like this sounds more rational, it sounds more human, but we need better tools to do it. So this layer in the layer in the middle here is the stuff that we're trying to build, which is modern infrastructure for modern movements, all the way down to the way we think about data, right? So we need data that is graph-based. The traditional voter data infrastructure and organizational infrastructure is flat, static demographic data. the thing that is interesting about Cambridge Analytica, the guy who asked the question left, is that it includes much more dynamic data about the people that we're talking to. It includes things like social data and opinions and like what people are doing and what people think. It is a dynamic living foundation for how we understand the people we're trying to engage. That's what we need, right? And we need to build this. We need to invest in some new data infrastructure that reflects the world that we are operating in and the people that we are trying to inspire. And then we need good tools for activating folks, and we need good tools for pushing this content and the ideas that we're investing in into the graph in ways that are as intelligent and targeted as the way we do voter contact. Right now, traditionally, the data sets we use for engagement, so field, digital, voter contact, voter targeting, and the data that we use for media targeting are largely disconnected. They tend to be very disparate data sets, and there's been a lot of work to try to integrate. Most of the effort, if you think about the organizations that you work in or the campaigns that you work on, is around integration. I had this bananas title in 2012, Chief Integration and Innovation Officer. Still don't know what it means. But it was because of this problem, right? Like, so I oversaw all the technology and analytics and data and cybersecurity and all these other pieces. But the problem was how those things got integrated across all these departments. Because there's this disconnect, there's this discomfort between the world, the map in our head, and the world that we're trying to navigate, right? So getting to a place where we can activate and talk and communicate using a shared set of data is where we need to go, right? This is the foundation of a movement where the people and the teams inside our organizations and campaigns are working toward a shared sense of purpose, right? There, you stop having departments fighting for each other. And the nonprofits that people work in, how many times have you seen a communications department, a media department, and the development department has their own communications people? This is common. People are nodding. That's bananas. Like now you have 3 identities. You have 3 brands. You have 3 narratives inside one organization. What is fundamental, one of the fundamental consequences of a world that is a graph that's this interconnected is a single sense of self. Right, and you're going to talk differently and focus differently in different communities, but you're still one person. Like the easy, problematic story of this is, do people remember the 47% video in 2012, Governor Romney? The problem with that wasn't just that what he said was offensive. It was that it was completely at odds with the other things that he was saying. Right, it was politically damaging because it reinforced an uncertainty people had about him as being out of touch. But it reflected a belief that if he said something in that private room, it would stay there, right? But what we all know is that one of the waiters videotaped it on an iPhone and then sent it to Mother Jones, and then we put it on every television in America that we could pay for. That was not what Governor Romney intended, right? But this is the single sense of self. Like, you can't be schizophrenic and be taken seriously. So this is part of getting closer. The other piece is being able to share with your friends, right? Organizations, there are going to be a lot of movements. This is not the only room like this right now. In fact, I'm spending most of my time meeting and spending time with and going to convenings and things like the arena and the resistance, all these other pieces, trying to be like human connective tissue between these things, but I'm not gonna do that well because there's only 24 hours in the day and I can't fly that much. So we need to find ways of sharing data. We need to find ways of communicating with each other and being willing to recognize that we are more effective all succeeding. Like, we're talking about regenerative economies and collective success, and then as organizations, we're being self-centered and territorial. So think about that for a second and stop being self-centered and territorial. We're just hypocrites, right? We gotta stop doing that. So, sorry? Yeah, okay. And then the last piece is about being able to tell stories effectively in more environments and outside the traditional echo chambers in which we usually talk. Right? One of the things projects I've been working on is trying to articulate some foundation for this why question about being progressive. It's a series of essays. It's like rewriting the Federalist Papers. The problem is that my natural inclination is to put it up on Medium, or maybe I can get an op-ed in the Atlantic. End of story. It's not going to change. That's like us having the argument of violent agreement again, right? Like, what we really need is for this to be seen and read in communities where this frustration and anxiety is so rampant, and they're not going to read The Atlantic. But I don't know how to do that. So we need tools. We need tools for that too. So that's this. Hunter wanted me to share that this is the project that sort of based on my skills and what I know, and everybody, I think, most of the people in this room, most of the people that I know, have been in some version of this sort of self-examination about what do we do right now, right? And this is what I, frankly, for me personally, like trying to figure out, like, what are the highest and best uses of the things that I've learned and know how to do? This is what I'm trying to figure out, is infrastructure, right, that can be leveraged by organizations and by candidates, right? Candidates that are willing to challenge orthodoxy, candidates that are willing to push both parties in better directions, right, that lives external to the parties, so that there's some options, so that the grasp on the levers of power is a little weaker, right, so that we can communicate and lead in ways that feel like leadership and not like politicians. Right, we've lost this sense of public service about politics and government. Politics should be this amazing, joyous, the highest and noblest ideas. It's not what people associate with politics. It's like the opposite of what people associate with politics, and it's terrifying, it's sad. And I think it needs to be reclaimed, and this is sort of the piece that I'm working on about that. So the last thought on movement building before we open up to more questions that I wanted to give people was this thought, which is as we think about narrative and we think about what it means to create a movement, this is the thought you should have in your head, right? That if people are going to be inspired to spend themselves in the worthy cause, to quote Roosevelt from the arena, they need to be inspired to long for the endless immensity of the sea. So, what other questions do you have?